Welcome to Paranormal M, where the line between reality and the supernatural is blurred. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to never miss out on our chilling content. Prepare for a spooky experience. Should I see a priest? A few years ago, my boyfriend and I took a spontaneous trip one night to a supposed haunted road that's just outside of our city. There's a bridge on the road with underlying train tracks that's said to be the most paranormal part of the area. A witch from the late 1800s is rumored to have hung her 3 children and then herself from this bridge. Years later, a school bus flew off the same bridge. That wound up killing all of its passengers. It said that if you put your car in neutral in the middle of this bridge, you'll be pushed to safety. That's because the children don't want what happened to them to happen to you. We sat and talked in the middle of the bridge for several minutes before his Jeep started just inching forward. I was shocked and coming up with every excuse. I asked to turn back around and to try it again. Almost immediately there were noises coming from underneath the Jeep. Rattling and sounds like something was messing or something. After a few moments of rattling, the sound moved to the back by the license plate. This time it was obnoxiously loud and sounded like somebody was both scraping and banging a license plate or something of the sort against the back of this vehicle. I wanted to tell him to leave in this moment, but my body was too frozen to speak or to move. We both sat in complete shock as we listened to this horrendous noise slowly making its way up the passenger side of the door. And then without stopping, reaching the front passenger door where I was sitting. Instant silence. I was looking at me and staring at me for a good few seconds before I both felt and heard the knock of something on the door, which my thigh was leaning against. I practically jumped into my boyfriend's lap and he told me that he had heard it too. It felt like the size of the bottom of a basic highlighter. This feeling penetrated my thigh and I could feel it deep in my tissue long after we had gotten back home. We checked the Jeep for any damage and not a single piece of evidence was found. Did it attach itself to me? And how do I know if it did? Should I see a priest? Do you think that houses have their own energy? So we rented a 3-bedroom apartment January this year. Our partner lived there with another renter and I would visit him 2 to 3 days weekly. They work on site every day, so when I would stay there, I'm the only one left at home as I work remotely from 6 a.m. to 3 p.m. Every day that I was there, I was always just feeling anxious. Like someone's watching me either from outside or inside the house. I can't sleep on my own because I feel like something shitty would happen if I ever, just fall asleep. I would go up to a room, lock the door, and I'm alone to make myself feel safe. My partner and I had our first aggressive fight when we were there. There were several others following, which included throwing items at each other. We weren't in good terms with each other, or the renter. And that's my partner's workmate. That's because she was having issues with me, so. Our bedroom was facing an abandoned apartment. It doesn't have doors and window covers, so you could really see the inside. So anyway, the day came that we had to move out of the house, because of the other renter's issues with me. We found another apartment. It was a 2-bedroom, 2 blocks away from the previous house, and had moved there last June. This time I felt fine. I could sleep alone at any time I want. I had no feeling or something or someone watching me. Me and my partner would still have arguments, but not as bad as the ones we used to have then. Basically, the house feels a lot lighter now than the other one. I think what also helped us to feel more at ease is that we met the owners of the house. They're like a family of 3. The mom has a small baking business and the dad's friendly and easy to deal with. Never met their young daughter, but I feel like they're a good family as some kids from the neighborhood are asking us about them. I just realized now that if we're to move out and look for another apartment, we want to make sure to meet the owners to have a vibe of what kind of energy they have in the house. I think it's important to know because it actually affects the life of the new renters. Hawaii Ghosts, Honolulu City, Old Lady with Black Cloak. In 2021, I was visiting family in Oahu. It was my first time there, and I had to visit every place I could. Honestly, everything about Hawaii felt so happy and comforting. I slept outside every night in my parents' backyard, woke up with the sun. Every night for a week, it was absolutely magical. About a week in, my family and I decided to head to Honolulu, eat some food, shop, and walk around. We walked around until about sunset, and the last stop were these little alleyway shops. Can't explain where it is besides that it's in Honolulu City. It's my first time I went there. But basically, it was just at least 100 of salespeople with their carts of goods filled with, all these alleyways. But anyways, when I was done walking through, my parents and I walked over to this opening outside of the alleys. We decided to wait for, the remaining family to finish shopping. My family and I leaned up against the building for a moment to relax. I vaped, so I took that moment to take a few pulls. Now, I remember I was crouching and leaning up against the building. My mom leaning next to me, and my father was standing facing me, literally all within a foot of each other. But anyway, as I was in the middle of this pull, this old lady with a big black cloak or something, I remember almost resembling the evil witch from Snow White with the apple, it was all in face-to-face crouched next to me, just held her hand out. I immediately stood up, weirded out by the sudden invasion of personal space, but she was so close. The first observation I made was seeing a long nose, a bony, pale hand, but to me, the creepiest part was the cold, emotionless face that she gave me as I stood up. She didn't move her hand or face or anything for that matter as I stood, just her eyes. So for half a moment before I looked at my dad. Honestly, that's the image that haunts me and gives me the chills to this day. He glanced at me and I asked if I was good. Obviously, I could tell something spooked me, and I was like, yeah, but I just started to whimper. What's up with this lady? Less than a split second, I looked down, I was crouched and there's no lady. Literal what the fuck moment, spinning in circles trying to point out the lady to my parents, but there's nowhere to be seen. This little opening was big enough with only 2 alleyway openings, and really not that many people. There's no way we wouldn't have seen this lady walking out of there. When I tell you she was gone before I could finish the sentence, my dad was like, thought I saw you look at something before you stood up. Like what? She was literally body to body with me with her hand out. After that spook, I got back to my parents' house, tortured myself with Hawaiian myths, legends, and ghosts. Let's just say I never slept outside again. Ghost drums in the woods. I was staying the night with my Nana. They lived alone in the middle of the woods except for a few of her animals. Often my uncle and his hunting buddies went out and hunted for deer when it was in season. One of them told a pretty convincing and scary story to my Nana. He told her that when he stopped in the woods to take a break, he heard like a rhythmic drum beat slowly passing him. He didn't see anyone. He described it almost like an old small drum, and said it could be like a Native American ghost. That's because my Nana lived in an area where she states had a burial ground nearby. I'm a skeptic, despite having my fair share of stories, and had no idea if Native Americans had drums, and a war took place in that town, so it could have been soldiers. So I believed it to an extent. But what happened that night after I heard the story still leaves me teary-eyed today. I was up all by myself in the guest room, just on the other side of, at the trailer, and I was scrolling on my phone. The bed I was on was next to the window. Out of nowhere, I heard drums slowly passing by the window and disappearing into the woods. Without a thought, I ran into the bathroom and locked myself in it, trying to think about what it could be and starting thinking about the story I was told. So I ran into my Nana's room after about 10 minutes and I woke her up, telling her what was happening. She said that it could have been a big buck, stating that their antlers can make a drumming-like noise when walking. But her yard was gated, and beyond it was the woods. Couldn't have been the men either, because hunting season was over and they all went back home. That was more than an hour away. I still visit to this day and heard anything else, but I still get told stories about how family members of mine will hear noises in the woods that they can't describe. The house where a man killed himself. So when I was about 9 or 10, I lived in this trailer with my nana, brother, and my dad in the middle of the woods. We had neighbors, which were other trailer owners. I can't exactly remember if the house I lived in, like a man who killed himself over his homosexuality, or the neighboring one. But I've had 2 major paranormal encounters there. We're going to start off light with this one. I was chilling in my bedroom, which was next to the bathroom. Both doors to both the rooms were wide open. As I was sitting on the floor playing with my doll, I looked up and I saw a shadow of a man walking out of the restroom, so I called, "Dad?" I got up and walked toward the restroom myself, so didn't see anybody there, no one in the restroom. And if it was my dad, there would have been nowhere to turn other than down the hallway, which I obviously would have been able to see and heard him walk down. This second encounter is a lot more scarier, because everyone was there for it. Not sure how the night began, but I believe it was because my nana started talking about the man who shot himself. We got to the conversation about ghosts, and then our small dog started flipping out, barking at the corner of the living room. We all stared in disbelief because he'd never done this before. He'd go quiet, but whenever he said the word ghost or dead, he'd start yelling again. That whole night felt weird. We all believe in these kinds of things, and left it at that. Left it that it was probably him. My paranormal story. I'm a 34-year-old male in the USA. Overall, I've had a pretty normal life, except for the experiences I'm about to tell you. Some of these experiences still shake me to my core. I've never been able to share them with any one person to the face. The following story does mention alcohol, and yes, it's a little on the nose, but I'm a huge Ghostbusters fan. This is relevant to the story. I don't have exact years or ages for my experiences, so bear with me. When I was around 7 or 9, I had a rubber Stay Puffed Marshmallow Man. I remember waking up and looking straight at it. Nothing crazy here, but I remember blinking and seeing it in a different part of the room. I remember thinking, it's just a kid with an overactive imagination, no big deal. I remember blinking again, and it was on my bed. The only thing I could do was throw the covers over my head. It was on my bed and woke me up in the morning. Same time frame with this next one. I remember waking up and looking at a chair in my bedroom. I remember seeing an apparition sitting in it. Couldn't make out a face or anything, but it was wearing a dress. I remember thinking, oh, it must be reflection or the light from the coyote light. I grew up in rural Illinois, and I remember thinking if I just move, it'll go away. It didn't. It just sat there watching me. I got back in bed, pulled my blanket over me, and nothing happened. I don't recall telling my family this experience because I don't remember any exact conversations. And if we did talk to it, they weren't remarkable. We eventually moved to a different house a few miles away, because of a few reasons, but none of them were due to paranormal reasons. It was also another rural house. I think it was 12 or 13. At this time, no experiences, but dreams. The first dream was me and my older brother in our parents' bedroom. It wasn't out of the ordinary for us to be in there. The family computer was in there, and they didn't want us all in there all night. This was circa 2002. We were talking, and I remember about something, like, what are we going to do with her? What are we going to do about her? And I also had a weird thing where I still had an internal monologue, even in dreams. I remember thinking, what are we talking about? At this point in the dream, I looked over to the 2 windows that looked into the front yard. A person stood there looking out the windows. Had a black hood and a black one-piece bathing suit like a little girl. Couldn't have been more than 3 or 4 feet tall. She turned around and her hood was like an old executioner's hood where her eyes should have been. That was indicated by eye holes and just skin. I woke up screaming. A month went by and I ended up having another dream. This time I was on a school bus in like a forested area. I'd never been in a place like this before. The school bus was driving on a dirt road, and in the dream I kept saying, I have to get off at the library. I see a roof of a building behind a hill. Cut to me in the library. It was a beautiful library, solid bookshelves from floor to ceiling. Then I heard a voice. I have to protect you from her. I asked who was her. She even said, oh no. I looked above me at the library and had a second floor that was open with a balcony. 3 golden rings flew out from the second story, coming over me and moving up and down all over me. Then the third dream. This one was terrifying. It was also about a month later. My dream just starts and I'm looking down a purple and white swirling vortex, almost like a blink. I see a little girl's head floating in the vortex where her eyes are supposed to be, and I just see the vortex like they're just straight holes. Another blink, and about 5 or 6 smaller heads started floating around the head, and they started chanting, and I woke up screaming. Yes, Gecko. Then nothing happens for years. Cut to me being 21 in the U.S. military. One night, me, a guy deployed with a different unit, and a couple of others are in the barracks. We're drinking like usual. The buddy says, hey, want to mess around with the Ouija board? We all agree. We're all half drunk on PBR anyway. So we make one from like a fucking pizza box lid and a broken shot glass. Guy whose idea it was does its thing, and we all have our fingers in the glass, and this thing starts moving on its own. Firstly, it's telling us it's the dude's dead grandmother, although it keeps sliding and touching me. After a little bit more interrogation, it's starting to spell out its name. Before that, my buddy does this closing spell thing. Tried to discover mediums after that. Got the Goetia. Medium informed me that I had Saint Raphael, Saint Michael, and Saint Azrael as guardians. I don't know what to conclude from that. A mimic or something else? For some background, I was raised with a demon attached to my father. He called himself Mordecai, and although he never hurt me, he tormented my dad 24/7. When my dad had an exorcism done, and I was 17, he attached himself to me, but still never did anything to hurt or ruin me. Fast forward to when I'm 21 in my own apartment and living alone. I had our family dog as my ESA to help with my mental health. I noticed one day my dog would sit and growl quietly. He was fixated in the closet. Thought nothing of it, just told him it was okay, that we could go outside for a walk. This happened all day, every day, no matter the time. I never cared for the paranormal and didn't put too much thought into it. I didn't want to give it power over my thoughts, you know? But nothing crazy ever happened in my apartment, nothing that couldn't be explained. I let this thing in my closet just be, as it never seemed to leave. I'd make jokes like, if you're going to be here and make my dog irritated, at least pay some rent. A couple of months later, I let a friend move in. She needed somewhere. I had an extra room available. We'd been friends since we were like 12, so this wasn't a problem for me. She was raised Wiccan, practiced Wicca, very in tune with spirits, and could indicate where, their gender, their motive, their energies, and a name if they had one. One day I walk into my room from hers. I see a hanger swinging violently. There's no airflow to the closet, nothing in there that had been touched in the last few minutes. I asked her to come in and see if there's something in the closet, because I had a silly suspicion nothing had ever moved. Not the way this hanger was. She came in inside my closet, 20 seconds go by, and she gets uneasy and says, "Really have never noticed this. It's hard to breathe. They're not happy. He's nice." She stepped out. We stayed out of the room the rest of the night. About a week later, I leave for work around 11:30 a.m. I say goodbye to her, and she watches me walk out of the apartment and lock the door. Around 1 p.m., she calls me and goes, "Hey, did you just come back?" "Couldn't help you. I was in the shower." Explained I'd been gone for the whole time, never came back home. She goes, "No, you had to come back. I heard the door open and close and yelled my name as if you had a question. And I yelled again and said I hadn't been home. Maybe she just thought it up. She got anxious and stern, confirming, "No, you walked in, you yelled my name, you knocked on the door, and someone was here. They sounded exactly like you." I was just speechless because I locked the door and we live in a safe neighborhood. I couldn't leave work to go home with her and make sure she was safe. I had no idea what was going on. We talked briefly about the experience when I got home, and over the next year or so of living there, she'd tell me about items in her room being thrown at her, her name being called from across the apartment in my voice, experiencing sleep paralysis and difficulty breathing. She'd send me videos of items being tossed off the counter at her. One night we were drinking. She set her bottle of tequila on top of the fridge so we didn't knock it over. After maybe 5 minutes, I watched it fly across the kitchen to hit her in the head, and then my phone fell to the floor and just inches away from me. We stared at each other like, what the fuck can we even do about this? She tried time and again just to get rid of this thing. We had done smoke cleanses of the apartment, smudging, salt, everything we knew. He just kept himself in the closet till she was around. He hated her, made that known. When we moved from each other, activity stopped. I still feel a presence in my... I worked on strengthening my skills for this stuff, but nothing else happened. The dog no longer growls, no objects move, no voices calling out names. I don't care to figure out what this thing is. If it's Mordecai, he's just doing what he's always done, which is just like a bystander in my life. I can't understand what about this girl he didn't like. Communication with the spirit realm. A few years ago, I was fumbling around the house on a drizzly day trying to find a good book to read along with a warm cup of tea. Scanning through the many bookshelves, but nothing really stood out. Same old, same old. That was when I remembered having gone up to the attic a month or so before and seeing a couple stacks of books in the corner that I'd made a mental note to come back to. Our house is very old. None of those books belonged to us, so I had no idea what they could be because they belonged to the previous owner who's now passed away. But anywho, I went up there and started with the first book in one of the stacks. I just started to leaf through the first few pages. Sitting crisscrossed on the floor in the poorly lit dusty space just a few feet from the stack. Mind you, I was not touching the stack, nor was I making any movements aside from turning the pages of the book I was looking at. Some old paperback Western novel with yellow and stale pages that I don't remember the name of. There was no logical reason for it to happen, but a book in one of the stacks fell off and smacked the floor with a deep thud. I looked up from where I was sitting and looked at the hardcover book curiously. It's too dusty to make out what it was. Set the Western novel down and reached for the book and wiped the cover off. A chill ran down my spine when I read the title. Communication with the Spirit Realm. I don't remember the author, but it was just cultish and creepy as it sounds. I remember it had a weird energy to it, too. Now that sounds preposterous, but that's the best way I can describe it. Like it was waiting for someone to find it and that someone had finally come along. Needless to say, I burned it the next day, and I have zero regrets. I heard a choir late at night. I'm pretty agnostic when it comes to the paranormal, but I figured I could talk about something strange that happened a few days ago that I still can't explain. It was around 2 a.m. I went to the bathroom to brush my teeth. All of a sudden I heard really clearly, as if it was happening inside the house or the bathroom, a choir of men singing for 3 or so seconds. Then it stopped. Figured it would have been some family member playing video games, but they were all asleep. Maybe it could have been the neighbor, but he doesn't like singing either. He's a really quiet individual. So that leaves me with the question, was it my imagination playing tricks on me late at night, or did it really happen? I literally heard it as if a choir of men were singing in the bathroom and it was really clear. They didn't sing any specific words either, so what do you guys think? Also, none of the people in my neighborhood sing, and I live in a pretty quiet neighborhood too. It isn't near any auditorium or church, and the way they were singing sounded like a religious choir. so I really cannot explain how this happened at 2 in the morning. I saw something. I'm 30 years old. I believe I was around the age of 9 or 10, maybe even a little bit older. I had a head concussion, and what happened was my dad laid out a concrete floor outside next to our house to make an outside patio. He made like an outing over the pavement just to give us shade so we can play underneath it. My mom hung up a hammock for us to lay in, and I have a little brother who's 4 years younger than me. I also have a sister who's 6 years older than me. She was outside watching after us. My little brother wanted to swing in the hammock, so me and my brother crawl into the hammock. We're sitting on it as if we were riding a bike. My sister was swinging the hammock for us. My little brother yelled faster and faster, which she did. She went faster and faster. When she was pushing, she was also pulling it, so it was going left to right, but also sort of bouncing so her bottom was also lifting off the hammock. I don't know what exactly happened, but my little brother was falling off, but for some reason everything was slow motion to where I let go of the hammock and reached out to grab him. Pulled him close to my body and I hugged him and ended up rolling over so I can land on my back instead of on him. Honestly, I don't know how it did it, and how I reacted to do that. It was like my body just did it. Anyways, I ended up hitting my head on the concrete floor on the side of the house. I lost consciousness for a few seconds, and it felt like my mom mentions that I was out for like a few minutes. When I woke up, my mom and sister were trying to pick me up. My mom was already called for an ambulance. My mom's looking at me while I'm being picked up, and she's telling me to walk. I can't speak, I can't feel my legs, my arms felt like they were stretching miles ahead of me. My mom sat me down. I assume I lost consciousness again, because I woke up in the hospital. I'm not really clear about what happened or really asked my mom about it again. It's just something no one in my family likes to speak of or bring up. I remember having to learn to hold a pencil and eating and walking again. I remember my brother coming to visit because in the hospital they had a PlayStation, and I remember they only came to play that. I just remember feeling good and being normal. Now I deal with migraines since, and it's normal now to me. But after the hospital, I was finally released to go home, and my first night home was horrible. I've seen things that have just made me feel uncomfortable. First night at home. So I couldn't be active. I had to just rest and make sure I'm not running and doing things for a few months. So my mom made me sleep in her room so that she can keep away, keep a mom eye on me, I guess you could say. Let's just say I never slept in that room again. She put my bed next to the window so I could look out and just be able to look out at whatever I wanted. It was time to go to bed, and I believe I fell asleep. I woke up, and I don't know, didn't feel late, and I want to say it was maybe 9 or 10 because my parents were still awake watching TV. So our layout of the house is like a driveway that's fenced in. Walk into the front porch and then enter into the living room. It's the left side. Then my mom's bedroom is on the right side next to the living room, so you can keep walking maybe 10 feet and there's a hallway. In the hallway, my sister's room on the left side, and the bathroom across my sister's room on the right. Keep walking down the hallway and you come up to either living room. That's what we'll call it. Then on the left, there's 2 other bedrooms and a bathroom on the left side, and keep down, there's a kitchen that's also connected to the second living room. So anyways, I don't know if all that was important, but that's the layout, and it seems like a big house, but honestly, it wasn't that big. Anyways, going back to when I woke up maybe around 9 p.m. or 10 p.m., I opened my eyes and the ceiling was spinning. I got really dizzy. Felt like throwing up. I would sit up and the ceiling would stop spinning. I would lay down and it would start spinning again. Closed my eyes and it felt like I was floating in the air and the room was spinning. I don't know if I'm explaining it, but maybe it's just a feeling. Screamed for my mom, and she comes and gives me some medicine, and I was prescribed to help with sleeping and relaxing. I woke up the second time, and this time everybody was asleep and I could see my mom and dad sleeping, so I wanted to say it was late, but maybe 4 a.m. It was light out, at least a little bit. Unless I was dreaming. Anyways, I was just laying there, and for some reason I looked out the window. I ended up seeing something cringe and something abnormal. I'm even kind of traumatized about it to this day. Outside my window, my dad had put a trampoline, so when I went out to look and see the trampoline, I look outside the window and all I know is I froze. I saw a guy in all black. It looked like leather. Everything was leather, his gloves, his pants, his coat, his boots. He had a cowboy hat, which was black. He was standing on the trampoline just looking at me. The one thing that still makes me cry to this day was he was holding our 2 pet dogs upside down by their back legs. I literally just stared at this thing for a long time. It felt like 5 minutes, but there's no movement. I was frozen. I wanted to just look away, but I just couldn't. I wanted to close the curtain. Couldn't do that either. After maybe 5 minutes, I was finally able to close the curtain and lay back down and go to sleep, and I had no problems falling asleep, but I was scared at that moment. But it was a different kind of scared. It's like I knew him, or thinking this is normal, or if it was just a dream that just really never woke up. I woke up and remember everything clearly. Asked my older brother, who was 4 years older than me, to check on the dogs for me and see if they're okay, which they were. They were just running around like they normally do. Phew. A tale of creature that turns into an owl. I'm Latina, so in our culture we're gifted jewelry at a young age. When I was little, my mom purchased a necklace that has the Virgin Mary on it with diamonds surrounding it. I was around the age of 14 years old, at least I believe. Decided to go outside to jump on the trampoline that we had. And yeah, it was pretty late, can't really say what time it was, but it was pretty dark, but my mom had porch lights that face out to light up the front yard. So I'm jumping and enjoying the alone time, and all of a sudden the bird came down and just snatched my necklace off of me. I freaked out because the bird, with its wings spread out, was taller than me at the time. It felt like it could literally come down and snatch me if it wanted to. So I run in and told my mom that a bird snatched my necklace. I was so upset and confused because my mom didn't believe me. She thought I'd lost it and I was playing outside. The very next morning, my mom was in the kitchen just making coffee and pancakes for us before going to school. My mom has a little window above her sink where she can look out the backyard, and right next to that window is like an old tree. We lived in this house for 20 years, and the tree's been there before we moved into it. But anyways, my mom looks out and hanging from the window is my necklace. My mom was so confused because if I lost it in the front, why is it in the back hanging by the window? My dad gets a ladder and goes to get it. My mom sat me down and told me a tale. Witches can turn into owls. My mom believes that a witch was watching me, that we need to tell the witch or owl to stay away from me. She said that they can be bad, but there are some good people that believe that they can be good. My mom put the necklace back on me. That night, my mom heard an owl, and she thinks it was resting on a tree, but it was screeching and clicking. Honestly, I don't know if owls make those kinds of noises, but my mom was not having it. Went to the porch and yelled, "We don't want you here. We don't need your company. You are to leave this property, and you are to leave this family alone." This was the polite way to put it, because originally she was speaking Spanish, just kind of cussing it out. Never had another experience with an owl after that until maybe 5 years ago. I used to work a mid-shift. That's 12:30 to 9 p.m. I'd have to get my daughter from my mom after work to go home. Well, that's what I did. And I was driving and it was dark and I was leaving my mom's home. Something landed on top of my car. Thought it was maybe like trash or a branch falling. Kept going, came to a stop, and an owl flew over an extinguisher that was on the side of the road and just stared at me. I took my phone out to take a picture, but when I did, it flew away, so I was like, oh, okay, it's just an owl. It's not what they told me years ago. So I didn't see it anymore. I continued, and then the owl flew along past me to a stop sign and just started to freak out. I started to yell at it, telling it to leave us alone and that we don't want anything to do with you. I just did what my mom did when it happened before. Never seen it again and never experienced it again. But when my daughter was born 8 years ago, I gifted her that same necklace my mom gifted me. She still wears it to this day. I'm not sure if anybody can tell me if it's true about the tale my mom told me when I was younger. Maybe it was just an actual owl just praying for food and I saw it, right? I don't know. Devil or demon in my home? All my life I was been a skeptic, at least for paranormal activities. But I've always found a way to logically make sense of these experiences. This home that I've lived in has always had a story to it. When I was younger, my family told me that the previous owner of the home used to have a daughter. But one morning when she went back to her backyard to swing out the family's tire swing, the story be told that the ropes had snapped somehow, and the tire crushed the poor girl. I don't know her age, but I assume she was around 5 or 8. Soon after the family moved out and the home sat for a good few years before we began living there. This swing to this day is far out from the property. It's completely overrun with forest and nature, but a rope is still attached to a branch. We had our own tire swing that was also far off from the property, but it was much closer than the previous swing. Like her, my younger brother had an incident. Our own tire swing snapped mysteriously. He broke his arm. After that, we never fixed the swing. After the years went by, there were plenty of incidents that the rest of my family would encounter. My mother and sister saw somebody standing inside the house in front of a window while they were outside alone. No one else was home at the time, but my mother shouted out, thinking that maybe it was one of us that had just arrived. When they didn't get a response from, "Hey, when did you get home?" insert my name, they were puzzled. They really believed it. They believed that it was me that they saw, so they assumed that I was in a bad mood and I was ignoring them. They immediately went inside to check up on me, but I wasn't there. In fact, no one was. My brother woke me up one night because he had heard voices outside. Everyone else was asleep, so he grabbed a shovel and handed me a cane and asked me to check out the outside. We searched the area and no one was out there. We do have a few neighbors, but all their homes are quite distant. There's no reason to come to our house, let alone at 1 a.m. in the morning. But here's where my own little story happens. Nothing ever happens to me or when I'm around, but then my first and maybe last encounter happened. Nothing major, but still unexplainable to me. A few months ago, we were discussing about some of our worries about the house. The family went on about the tales I had mentioned and also many more that had happened over the years. I explained to everybody that maybe they're just buying into the creepy stuff a little bit too much, so their brains are just leaning towards these experiences. They think they saw a shadowy figure walk by every now and then, but they're so open to the fact that the house is haunted. Like they truly believe that the house is haunted by a demon or by the devil himself. We went our own ways after breakfast. Everyone in the house had errands of their own to run that day, and I was left alone in the house. I've been home alone plenty of times, and nothing ever happened. But after everybody left, I went into our garage because I like to store things in there like books and, well, mostly junk. But they do have sentimental value. I left the door cracked because it's a bit hard to close. I'm a bit lazy, so I didn't want to struggle to open and close the door a second time. Not a lot of effort, I'm just lazy. But for some reason I had the feeling somebody was behind me. Turned around, and the second I did, I heard the door close. Immediately, I thought I was getting pranked because we were, talking about spooky stuff earlier. I immediately ran up to the door, gave it a push. It didn't open. I realized the door was completely closed, even though I'd left it cracked. So using a minimal amount of effort, I pushed open the door and shout, "Really, guys?" Trying to scare me. But no one was there. I had my things around 6 feet away from the door, so nobody could have closed the door and sprinted away before I could see them, or at least hear them run away. I wasted no time getting to the door in an attempt to catch the prankster in the act. So strange. My immediate thought was, maybe they're so fast, So I sprinted to the front door and looked outside to see no cars. No one was home. I checked every room and every hiding spot I could think of. No one was home but me. Made myself a quick meal as I contemplated an explanation, but to no avail. I resumed the day like it never happened, but every now and then I'd think about what had happened. Was it a demon or the devil? I recalled the story of the little girl who had died here. I was around 8 when I told the story, and now I'm 23. If she had anything to do with this, why now out of all times? Weird stuff my whole childhood. I, a 27-year-old female, grew up with paranormal stuff happening ever since I could remember. However I remember being told since I was a child of divorce, I had an active imagination. It wasn't until things would happen to my parents as well. It wasn't until I was about 23 that my dad told me that somebody in our family made a pact. And this makes me very skeptical about the whole thing, because what do you mean, make a pact? But nonetheless, he told me that she was involved in brujeria, promised her bloodline's firstborn son. Everyone in her family, including myself, has had a miscarriage. I had horrible nightmares while I was pregnant with my son. He was hospitalized for 2 weeks after he was born. My baby brother died in the womb when he was 39 weeks. My dad's a Christian. However, these things only happened when I was under his care or around him. Nothing weird has happened since. The first experience I had, I was about 5 years old, and my mother and father were, my mother and father were there, and we all saw the same thing. I had porcelain dolls in my room, and I never had a fear of the dark or sleeping alone. But these dolls were bought at some old weird garage sale. I remember feeling so uneasy around them. Hated the fact that they were in my room, and that night I insisted the lights be on. My bed faced the dresser that they were on, and they were placed against the mirror of my dresser, about a foot away from falling in either direction. However, I saw them move. I was paralyzed with fear, and I still remember wanting to scream. Nothing was coming out. I wanted to just cry, but I couldn't. I couldn't breathe, and then finally, I fell, went underneath my covers, and just wailed. My mother came in the room, and so did my dad. My mom called me down, and I told them what happened, and she found the doll in my bed. I thought I was pranking them. I was hysterical, begged them to sleep in my parents' bed. I was out like a light. My dad fell asleep on the couch, and as a child I remembered that was the end of it. But then later in my adult life, my dad told me how his night went. He said he slept on the couch to give me and my mom space. My mom put the doll back in the dresser facing my bed again, left it alone. My dad was falling asleep, and he said he felt the couch sinking. He started sweating and got extremely nauseous. He said he tried to get up from the couch but couldn't, and then a pillow went over his face while he heard giggling. He was struggling for minutes. He said he finally jumped up and went to the bathroom and just dry heaved. The following morning, the doll was facing out to the hallway from the dresser. They still thought it was me and my silly prank. My mother told me the doctor was Cuban and told her to believe me, burn the dolls. My mother just saved them in a box for years afterwards. Later, when I was 10, my parents got a divorce. I'd been drawing weird things and writing how I wanted to die, and I hated myself. To this day, I'm not sure why I wrote it. They were living in a huge house where doors would close on their own. The chandelier in the living room would move even when it was mounted in the high ceiling. There were these portraits in the living room that I swear would make little noises, like popping sounds with their mouths. It's hard to explain the noise, but think of Donkey in Shrek 2 when he was annoying Shrek in the carriage. One day I was watching TV while sitting on the floor. My cup of lemonade moved while I was on the floor, and I was running downstairs. The lights upstairs cut off. When I reached downstairs, they had no idea what I was talking about. I mentioned the lights didn't go on downstairs. Didn't go out either. Then one random morning my dad woke up with a voicemail from me. I didn't have a phone, and it was unmistakably my voice. The voicemail came in around 2-ish in the morning. I was saying, "Hey Daddy, it's me. I wish you'd pick up your phone. I gotta go now." This was probably one of the worst experiences because I logically can't explain it. And a number that called, his number, was as if it came from his voicemail. I love my dad and I don't think he's an evil man. But I don't know why this only happened when I was around him or my mom. Is there a way to logically explain any of these encounters? Now that I have children, I'm so scared that I'm destined for tragedy or even worse. My children will have to pay for other generations' mistakes. I do my best to protect them, but I can't help but feel like some freak accident is going to happen. I'm not very religious, but I pray and manifest and I ask for protection. But maybe some of you can explain it. I don't know, maybe it was a mass hysteria, mold poisoning. Told my husband, and my dad even told him about some of these experiences that they never really believed us until I visited my grandmother and we took a picture of my great-grandmother who was deceased was in one of the pictures over my shoulder. Her likeness was captured. Her headscarf that she would pretty much always wear to hide her grays, like her nose and her eyes. It's not those blue or white apparitions. Maybe it was just the glare, but my husband freaked out. Weird meeting in Italy. My cousin's friend named Bob decided to spend his summer vacation in Italy, far from the big cities. He chose to stay in a small remote village nestled in the mountains. Unfortunately, I don't really remember the name. This village, made up of stone houses eroded by time, was populated almost exclusively by elderly people. The place had a special atmosphere, full of mystery and melancholy. The first night as he was getting ready to go to bed, Bob thought he saw a blurry figure behind his bedroom door. At first, he thought it was an illusion. Due to the fatigue of the trip, he didn't pay attention to it and fell asleep. The next evening after the day spent, Bob went out to get some fresh air. He then saw an old lady walking slowly in a deserted street, accompanied by a small dog. The place wasn't necessarily well lit. Bob couldn't distinguish the features of the face of this lady correctly after that. He just looked at her and she continued her walk, soon disappearing in the shadow of an alley. The next morning, Bob started a conversation with an old inhabitant of the village. This old man then told Bob a story. A few years ago, an old lady and her dog died in a house fire, not far from where Bob had seen the silhouette the night before. So according to a local legend, the spirit of this woman and her dog would still wander in the alleys of the village. Fortunately, I don't have a continuation of the story, and not the direct return of Bob. It's the only thing I know of the story. So how to explain this night vision? Was it just a coincidence, an illusion due to the mysterious atmosphere of the village? Or had he really witnessed a supernatural manifestation? Could the person he saw be the old lady and her dog? In what form could this woman have appeared to him? And you? What do you think? My paranormal experience. Back in 2020, my partner and I had just moved into an RV to travel around the US, do some parky work, working at national parks and resorts. We got jobs at a hotel in Kanab, that's in Utah, called Perry Lodge. My partner was a front desk clerk and I was a maintenance man. The job was difficult because of the heat, but otherwise I found the work thrilling, and I was learning a lot. One day in mid-August, I was spraying for weeds behind our biggest building, aptly named the 2-story. That's when I noticed one of the second-story windows was open and the curtain was billowing out as if blown by a decently strong wind. This confused me for 2 reasons. One, it wasn't particularly windy that day, but I figured that since it was above the fence line, it was probably getting more wind than I was feeling. 2, there was no one checked into the second story. When COVID hit us, there was a lot of confusion about how it could spread, how long it could live outside of the human body, and for us, the best way to sort of decontaminate public areas. We had sanctioned off the second story because it was carpeted while the first story had hardwood floors, which are easier to clean. So I jumped to my radio, asked if either of the other 2 maintenance people had been up there. Both said that they hadn't, so I switched over to the housekeeping channel with the same inquiry. Everybody said that they hadn't been up in the second story for weeks. However, some of the staff had clocked out by this point, and maybe one of them had opened it to just sort of air the room out or clean the outside window. Maybe they forgot to close the window. So I headed to close it, make sure there's no animals. We had a lot of bats in the area. When I got to the room number 213, I unlocked and opened the door. Immediately, a few things happened simultaneously that surprised me. First, I was immediately hit with a blast of cold air, like when you opened a freezer door at a gas station, but the air didn't really smell like the air conditioning was on. The air smelled stale and dusty, but not bad. The second thing that surprised me was that despite the cold air, the air conditioner wasn't on. And this was mid-August in Utah. It was over 90 degrees outside. Hallway was stuffy hot, but this room wasn't. The third thing that surprised me was that as soon as I walked through the threshold of the door, my radio immediately went to static. This had never happened before. I'd been in the other room in the second story. I'd been in crawl spaces. I'd been across the street at a gas station. Never before had my radio went to static like that. At this point, I thought somebody was messing with me. Figured one of the maintenance guys or the housekeeping went up here to play a joke on me or something, so I called out, "All right, you got me," which was met by silence, save the curtains flapping in the wind. So I took a couple more steps in and called out, "Very funny." You got me going for a second. Nothing. Slightly creeped out, I walked over to the window, pulled the curtain in close, and locked the window. This is when I noticed that there was a thin layer of dust over the air conditioning unit. If somebody had pushed the on-off button, I'd be able to see a fingerprint, but the dust was undisturbed. Right when I made that realization, it felt as though somebody was standing right behind me. And to be clear, I hadn't heard anything or felt anything physically, but had that same feeling you get when you feel someone's eyes on you. I looked around to find nothing but an empty room. Fully weirded out by this point, I made for the door and left. As soon as I crossed back over the threshold and into the hallway, my radio went back from static to silence. Needless to say, I was creeped out, but being at work, I had to finish my tasks, so I finished spraying the back of the building for weeds and made my way to the other workshop area to build another screen. To stop the bats. I finished the screen and headed back up to 213, but I was too scared to go in. So I just left the screen leaning up against the wall beside the door for the time being. I figured that if nobody had been installed, maybe I'd do it on my shift tomorrow. I would do it then. The rest of the workday and afternoon was uneventful. However, that night I had the maintenance and emergency phone. The maintenance staff had an emergency phone that guests could call if they locked themselves out of their toilet and, overflowing or just problems. We rotated who had it each night, and that night it was my turn. I hadn't gotten a call all night until around 3 a.m. The phone rings and I answer groggily. The person on the other line is an older woman. "Hi, I'm in room 113 and I was wondering if you could call the room above us and ask them to quiet down. Sounds like they're rearranging their furniture or wrestling or something. We have a long hike tomorrow. We need to have some rest." Immediately my heart dropped. I mumbled something about giving them a call and hung up, but I was shocked. Couldn't sleep the rest of the night. Tried to Google anybody who had a similar experience or deaths that could have happened in the area, or find anything related to Perry Lodge. The next day I went up there to see if anybody had replaced the screen, and of course it was waiting for me, so I mustered up all the courage I could and went in. Nothing. Normal room. Not cold, not creepy, no weird feelings of being watched. So I installed the screen without incident and left. To this day, I really have no idea or explanation for what happened. I think of it from time to time, and it still kind of creeps me out, though. The dog on my bed this morning wasn't my dog. I woke up this morning to the smell of sage, briefly remembering asking my brother what he was doing, and his explanation being something like, I walked in and got chills, so I'm saging your room. Thought I was remembering some weird dream or something, but nope. Asked my mom about it about an hour ago, and apparently my sister had passed the room and said hi. She said hi, at least to what they thought was my dog laying on my bed with me. I just kind of glanced over at her. She went to the living room after that and saw my dog, and one she thought was on the bed with me, in the living room with our other 2 dogs asleep. So after that, I guess she told my brother who came to see me, got the chills the second they came into my room, so they went and grabbed the sage and just kind of cleansed my room. Cleansed. Turns out, by insane paranoia, when I woke up a few minutes after they left, it was justified. I'll now be super paranoid for the next 5 months. Yay. Has anyone ever seen a statue move? It's strange, but I have a memory I think of pretty often. When I was probably 4 or 5, I remember my grandma had a statue of a little yellow lizard. I think it was on a tiny tree and it was on or next to like a little fountain. But I was petting it like a cat with one finger and examining it. I vividly remember it coming to life and biting me. It happened really fast, went back to normal, but I remember shouting from pain and confusion, and I cried to my grandpa right after. But even as a kid, I was so shocked. I knew it wasn't normal. For years, I would avoid the little lizard statue. I'd think about it a lot, though. Both grandparents had passed on, and I don't really know whatever happened to the statue. But for years, I was scared of it. I don't know if it was my imagination, but all of it felt so real. I remember it vividly, actively avoided it, and was uneasy about it. And even in adulthood, I think of it. So I'm not sure. I think my mother told me my grandma got it on a road trip in Arizona or something. This is the closest picture I can find that resembles it. Anybody else have any experiences like this where a statue or a decoration or painting moved unnaturally? A demonic happenstance on my haunted alma mater campus. A few years ago, I brought my friend to my hometown for the weekend, showing them our favorite spots and sharing childhood memories. One of my favorite places to visit when I'm home is my childhood basilica. It's located on my college campus, where I was baptized and attended Mass with my mom most weekends. It was a gloomy Saturday afternoon, which means the basilica is usually packed with wedding parties or funerals, expected to drive around campus instead of entering the parish. The basilica is massive. It's the oldest Benedictine monastery in the Western Hemisphere. It's stunning beyond words. But that comes with a price. My hometown college was incredibly haunted. In the late 60s, a massive fire occurred at the building adjacent to the basilica. It took 2 days to put it out. As legend has it, a sort of prefect was performing a satanic ritual in his apartment in the attic. They passed out. When the firefighters got upstairs, the room was burnt to a crisp. But the prefect, they were lying in the middle of a pentagram, dead but entirely physically unscathed. The room was charred and there were dark handprints on the walls. Renovators have tried time and time again to remove them, but they always come back. It's now the top floor of the business college and hosts storage for the admissions department. My alma mater is known to be incredibly haunted. Almost all of my friends have experienced something, from seeing a faceless monk floating around campus to waking up to a hooded figure sitting on their couch staring at them. The freshman dorm is haunted by a little girl, Jenny. They make themselves known to the girls on the 5th floor almost nightly. Besides appearing in mirrors behind residents across the building, she's best known for floating outside on top of floors, leaving handprints on the windows from the outside. And no, the windows don't open. Many friends have seen her crawling into their roommate's empty bed. I graduated in 2017, but the night before graduation, my friends and I chatted with Father John. They're in charge of the theology department and other Catholic school things. So apparently all the rumors of the demonic entities and the paranormal happenings at our tiny college are valid. It gets even freakier, because there were at least 7 exorcisms every year. Creepy, right? I've always been pretty sensitive, but this experience got me. My friend, niece, and I pulled into a hilly parking lot close to the Basilica. I was one of maybe 5 cars totaled in a layered lot, probably 100 yards from the church doors. For whatever reason, I pulled in next to a red Prius covered in bumper stickers, the Christian fish, social issues, cat lady, etc. Put my car in park. I'm driving and my friend's sitting passenger. They're closest to the red Prius. I turned back to talk to my niece and noticed that the driver, a woman with short red hair and a black hoodie, is staring at me with an empty look. That's fine, people are weird. I look again, she's still staring. My friend and I notice that she's smoking a cigarette with the windows up. Starting to get a weird feeling, so I shift my car into reverse. My friend asks me why I'm leaving. I turn to look and she's staring, but this time she has a red pentagram and a matching one on her forehead, which definitely wasn't there before. Halfway out of the parking spot, she takes the initiative, reverses her car, and drives away. Look at my friend and kind of shakily ask if he saw what I saw. Both my friend and niece asked me if I was okay, and neither of them had seen it. We get out, head inside. My knees are weak. I call my friend on campus. They're on the campus security. I wanted to ask if they'd seen this before. Nope. And I somehow muster up the energy to walk around campus, but the entire time I feel like something is watching me. I couldn't sleep that night. My friend and I go back to our town a few hours away from campus. Things start to get weird. I constantly feel like something is behind me or watching me. I buy sage, but that doesn't help the negative energy. And this next part really gets me. One night we visit a pub that we frequent with a few friends. That's where we meet up, usually a few times a month. And to preface this, I was sober that year. Our favorite Irish pub is located in a historically famous and haunted colonial town. And I've felt on multiple occasions that a woman in black period clothing was standing outside the stall when I was in the empty bathroom. So, kinda creepy, but fun nonetheless. We're listening to and singing along with live music, and I turn my head to the right where a group of younger adults are sitting, and something catches my eye. The girl in the middle of the table looks like she drowned. Blue face, purple lips covered in kelp. Something out of a movie. I blink, she's back to normal. It takes a few years for everything to calm down, and at least I can finally talk about it. I spoke with a friend recently and his wife who grew up traveling around basically the whole world with their diplomat father. They used to see the same happenings, including demons and ghosts flying across rooms. Now everything's relatively normal, but I'm seeing and feeling energies stronger than ever. What do we think? Did this start with a semi-demonic experience? What do you think? See you tomorrow? Hope so. Sweet dreams.